So welcome everybody. I'm Jeremy Lent, and welcome to this month's Deep Transformation Life Network meeting. And so, of course, really, as everyone in this group knows, we are living right now in a world that's increasingly dominated by billionaires. Um, and just last month, here in the United States, where I am, millions and millions of families were wondering even where their next meal was coming from, as the SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, was being halted in this political game by the Trump administration, which, by the way, contains at least 12 billionaires. Um, and right as they were worrying about where their next meal was coming from, the collective wealth of the top 10 US billionaires, it was reported, soared by $700 billion in just the past year, which I calculated would have been enough. Just that increase in wealth would have been enough for $2,000 to get given to every American who actually needed that food assistance just to stay just to alleviate their hunger. So what can be done about this terrible situation? And some of you who were here last month may remember we talked about with Cynthia Molabita about this notion of structural evil, this system that sucks wealth from ordinary people into a wealthy elite. And they're at the top of this wealth pump, are these 3,000 billionaires now that have a combined wealth of, it's been estimated as much as $16 trillion that they have amassed from the rest of humanity. And so today we have the opportunity to explore this crucial question with Chuck Collins, who's a leading scholar of inequality, and a colleague, Joni Praded, who was lead editor of Earth for All, a survival guide for humanity, which many of you may remember was actually featured in the live meeting last January. And so welcome to you, Chuck. Welcome to you, Joni. It's great to have you here. And Joni is actually collaborating with Chuck on a new book, which we're going to cover at some point soon in this conversation about what we can do about this horrendous situation. So Chuck plays a lead role at the Institute for Policy Studies, where he co-edits this great newsletter and website called inequality.org. And I've actually used it a lot as I've been doing the research for this book I've written. It's going to be published next spring on eco-civilization. A lot of the work I've done was on understanding these sources of inequality. And thank you, Chuck, for this, for inequality.org. It's really, I think, one of the best resources, maybe the best, that I've come across to really understand the drivers and the statistics around it. And Chuck recently published this book called Burned by Billionaires, which is this kind of expose of this excessive wealth at the tiny few at the tip of the pyramid that's impoverishing the rest of us. It's burning the rest of us. So in this conversation, we're going to have the chance to do this deep dive into this kind of structural violence and understand what we can do about it. And for those who are new to our these kind of sessions, a session is going to be 75 minutes long. We'll have about half an hour, about 30 minutes in discussion right now. I'll be talking with Joni and Chuck. And then we're going to go into breakout groups for a little bit, and then back to the main room for the last half hour, where you will have the chance to ask your questions directly. And if you have a question, but you'd prefer not to be spotlighted in the second half, put your question into the chat, and we'll try to kind of capture those, and I can ask them for you or whatever. So that's what we have today. So welcome to you both, Joni and Chuck. And Chuck, let me just turn to you. We have a mutual friend who I was very glad to be able to put us together. And I was excited about it because I've been, like I said, following your work for a long time. Really glad to make that connection. And I've been interested in and curious to discover that you actually came from inherited wealth. So you're somebody who actually was part of this kind of transmission of this kind of new aristocracy of elite wealth or whatever. But something changed in you. What? And I'm so curious. Could you maybe just start off by giving us a little bit of sense of your personal arc, how you grew up, and what happened to cause you to just get a sense of how wrong this was and commit your own time to trying to put things right?
Well, Jeremy, thank you for inviting Joni and I. And I mentioned this off cam before, but we're both living in a blizzard right now in the Northeast United States. It's very exciting. If I vanish, give me 5 minutes to flip on the generator and I'll come back. So anyway, but I'm thrilled to be with you. And yeah, just in terms of my own personal story that's informed this discussion about inequality, I was born on third base. I grew up in what you could call middle Richistan, which is something I explain in the book. Um, my great grandfather was the meat packer Oscar Mayer, which for people in the United States know is a kind of very popular brand. There's the Wienermobile, a car that drives around that looks like a giant hot dog, and an earworm of a jingle that many generations of us learned early on. So if anything, it's a curiosity. I can also talk about my Collins Irish roots, but it happens that part of my family is from Germany and was successful in the sausage business. And in my early 20s, like a lot of people in their early 20s, I was trying to make a sense of my path and decided becoming, I didn't really believe in inheritance in substantial inherited wealth. We all have inheritances, but the whole idea of dynastic wealth transmitting from one generation to another is not a good thing for both children, people, and the larger society. So I sort of made a decision in my mid-20s to give away the inheritance that I had. And like a lot
Mm.
of people in their 20s, it was an all or nothing decision. So I decided I gave it all away. So that's you know, but the reality is, and I write about this in this book, Born on Third Base, that Joni helped make that a better book. Um, uh, I write about how there's so much other advantage that flows to me. Anyway, so I'd like to say I have an intimate front row seat to the topic I write about, particularly how the wealthy hide their money and use the wealth defense industry to move money to the shadows and the
Yeah.
impact and harms that causes.
Yeah, well, I so appreciate to hear this, and yeah, I'm sure you've had so many people over the years say this to you, but I'm just kind of taking it in. What kind of decision is involved in that really deep shift, and that is so rare, and obviously we need more of that. And thank you for that. Um, and yeah, so you were mentioning just a moment ago. Richistan, which was this wonderful kind of landscape that you describe in your book, which maybe we can talk about. And just kind of almost uh, before we just get into that, it's kind of related. One of the questions that I had when I started to read your book and look at it, after all the analysis I've done of the structural violence of this wealth inequality that happens. I was going, well, why you focus on billionaires? Why not the elites in general? Because there's this whole sort of suction pump and it's but you have a very convincing explanation as you describe all that. So maybe you can just give us a little bit of this landscape of what you call Richistan, which I guess was you picked up from somebody else who came up with this, and then this kind of this Mount Everest kind of peak or whatever, which is where the
Yeah.
billionaires are, and why that's so important. So I'd love to hear that from you. I think that'd be helpful for all of us.
Well, I think we should be concerned about all these ex levels of inequality. But the question I was sort of coming posing was, where does the power reside? When does wealth become more than a driver of consumption and more a form of power? And so, borrowing from a journalist, Robert Frank, who wrote a book in 2007 called Richistan,
Hmm.
I kind of took his framework and added to it and updated it. Sort of basically saying, look, there's affluentville, the top 10% of households. That's obviously a powerful, wealthy segment. That group owns 93% of the assets in the US stock market. So that's, there's a substantial wealth
Yeah,
there. And
right.
then we talked about the billionaires, which, 3,000 billionaires at the global level, 920 as of this morning here in the US. But where else, where does the power reside? And so imagine you're driving through what I call lower Richistan, sort of the top 3% of wealth households in the US. And this is very much of a sort of US framework book, but I think there's clearly a global parallel. The
Right.
top 1%, we've talked a lot about the 1% and the power of the 1%. But what I've seen in the last 10 years, especially, is a lot of the income and wealth gains going not just upward to the top 1%, but that top 1/10 of 1%.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we've had a discussion just like in Europe about sort of if we were going to put a wealth cap or a limit on wealth, where does it, where should it reside? And I kind of make this argument that when you kind of hit that 1/10 of 1% that in the US, $40 million and up, you kind of move from having a high level of consumption and comfort, and you sort of, your life is set and your children are set, and you're living in a bubble that you can take around with you. But when you cross the line 40 million and up, you're not just buying another house or another yacht, you're buying a senator or a
Right.
media outlet, or
Uh-huh.
you're using that power
Mhm.
to shape the environment of commerce and regulation. And so it becomes much more corrosive. And that's the point at which we need to sort of wave our flags as societies and say, actually, this is where the harms start to really accelerate. And just
Yes.
to say, um, when we talk about policy solutions, again, we want to look at a wide range of solutions. But if we're really going to try to reverse these dynastic accumulations of wealth and power, we have to sort of focus in policies at that, not just the billionaires, but that top 1/10 of 1%.
Yes, yeah, right. I got you. I got you. Thanks. And so this kind of leads to something that Joni, I'd like to hear from you a little bit more about that. It's there's kind of structural, like there's something that's changed in the last few decades. And it's not just how, and it's something that didn't just sort of change spontaneously, but it changed for specific reasons. And it seems like those people in the upper Richistan are the ones who actually helped to make that change happen. And Joni, you've done so much work over the years in looking at these kind of structural issues, like the system as a whole. Maybe you could just take us through a little bit of an overview of what actually happened, like from in the last few decades, some of these statistics that this is not just a few more billionaires. It's like this massive increase in equality. How did that happen, and how did these elites make that and help to make that happen? And
Right. Yeah, good question. And like Chuck, I will say that there's a big storm outside, so if I blink, I'll come
so
back.
you're okay.
Um, but there was a massive but gradual, probably, shift in mindset since World War II
Yeah,
that kicked in. And one of the projects that I worked on was Earth for All, as you
yeah,
mentioned. And
yeah,
the ideas that moved that project forward were propelled by a group of 40 transformational economists. One
yeah,
of them was Ken Webster, and I think his summation of the three the three drivers
right.
is really great because it breaks it down into time frames, and you get those post World War II years like 45 through like the mid 70s where economies were still sort of serving the public good, maybe not very well, but that was the focus. The focus was on trying to get people back to work, creating social safety nets, and trying to make an imperfect thing hobble along
Right,
with a
exactly.
goal toward prosperity.
Yeah.
And then we got market liberalization and deregulation and everything, in the 80s leading up to like 2000, late
Right.
2000s.
Yeah.
And we had, you know, the rich Western countries embracing globalization. We had things getting increasingly privatized. We had government and labor getting weakened, and huge deregulation focus. And the end result was that you know we had this pivot towards all these new problems. We had you know, increased private debt, the infrastructure overall was weak. We had, uh, you know, we were just driven by short-termism, just
Yeah.
trying to respond to short-term market needs instead of long-term people needs, and
Hmm.
inequality rose because of that. So really, by the time we get around to to the 2008 financial crash,
Right.
um, you know, we had a big failure on our hands, and and then we saw what the reaction was. And the first priority was not to really go in and save people. It was really to save
Yeah.
assets.
Yeah.
And and so, and we also we had to battle a mindset of austerity and
Right.
the preservation of assets for basically
Yeah.
a renter class. So this vicious cycle kicked in where assets began to, beget more assets, and they concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. And we have this situation that we now have that creates another huge shift in mindset, which leads to a sort of dangerous form of populism.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And what I mean, the great irony is you get these populists, these authoritarian populists say, this system is screwed up, and everyone goes, yes, I'm going to vote for that person. And it's the very
Yeah,
billionaires who are funding that, and so they can almost take it to the next level. And that's
right.
something I kind of want to explore. Maybe we can turn back to you, Chuck, because this is what I really appreciated in your book, Burned by Billionaires. You have these chapter by chapter, comprehensively going across. This is how they screw up our education system. This is how they screw up our governance system. This is how they screw up our housing system. And what I have really begun to incorporate in my own understanding, maybe you can help to take us through this a bit, is that the billionaires or maybe the ones above the 40 million in the upper richest down, but especially the billionaires, it's not just that they are sucking up the wealth and enjoying it and using what you call the wealth defense industry of taxes and lawyers and accountants to actually perpetuate that, but they are literally changing the system itself they're using that power to change the system to suck up even more. So it's almost like the wealth pump is now getting even more automated and even more empowered by the very people who are sitting at the top of it. And maybe you could take us through a couple of examples of that. Yeah, one obvious one in governance, but a couple of less obvious ones, maybe around housing or health, just so we can understand why they are such a force for essentially structural evil. And I'm making a distinction, by the way, between the personalizing, which I appreciate you do in the book too. We're not personalizing people, even though there are some of these ultra billionaires who seem to be completely out of whack and just hell bent on doing as much harm to life and other humans as possible. But that's not what we're talking. We're talking about a system itself that they are actually making happen. And that's the point. That's what is the focus, I think. So love to hear more from you, Chuck, around that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that point because I think, individuals are responsible for their behavior, but most of us are operating inside of systems. And in this case, we're sort of in extreme inequality overdrive, autopilot almost. Wealth is funneling rapidly upward. Uh, you see a billionaire like Mackenzie Scott, who used to be married to Jeff Bezos, who said, I'm going to empty the vault. She gets 30 billion, she gives away 30 billion, and she still has 40 billion. Like it's growing so fast. So that's a kind of interesting
Right.
dilemma, if you will. But I wrote this book, Burned by Billionaires, for a popular audience who may not be thinking, "Oh, damn, billionaires." They're thinking, "My grocery bill is going up, or my housing costs are growing up, or why do I have to spend so much for healthcare?"
Hmm.
So I really tried to connect the dots between
Yeah.
sort of these distortions at the larger level and sort of how does it play out in day-to-day life. And and it's been actually fun to talk to people, and people bring to me new ways that I hadn't thought of. A friend of mine showed up and said, "Look there's two giant billionaire funds that own all the wheelchairs that are being manufactured in the US, and they're controlling the wheelchair market, and it's like, wow, I hadn't thought about that. So, as you said, Jeremy, I think understanding that concentrations of wealth are kind of disrupting and kind of rewiring the economy, and we're moving into, I call it the hyper extractive phase. And
Right.
fully understand it, you sort of have to get into your inner billionaire and think, well, you got $1 billion or $10 billion. Where do you park this money? Where does it go? And part of what happens is, even if you're not focused on rapid extraction and inequality, you always have investment advisors who say, Jeremy, let's take a third of your billion and move it into the speculative, casino part of the economy where you can get high returns. Like, where are you going to get a 22 or 25% return on your investments? Well, so that's, people talk about private equity. That's one example of these kind of
Right.
hyper extractive plundering apparatuses that are changing the nature of capitalism. So you could even say it's undermining healthy capitalism if you're talking to your free market friends who are, well, isn't this going to harm the society? Socialism? No, no. Actually, if you care about markets and healthy commerce, you're going to really be concerned. So housing is an interesting one because almost all our communities are experiencing acute crisis in affordable housing, unsheltered people, people paying 50% of their income in rent,
Yeah.
people who aspire to own a home. And what I try to do is say, look, all of this is being the crisis being supercharged by all that wealth moving into the housing. Housing is a place where if you're a billionaire, you want to diversify your assets. The reason Bill Gates owns more farmland than anyone in the US isn't because he's interested in farming. It's because he has so much wealth,
Yeah.
he's spreading it around.
Yeah.
And so now we see luxury housing being built that no one's even going to live in. It's a form of wealth storage.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, or you have funds that are buying up single family homes. Jeff Bezos invests in, he may be your landlord in your single family house because the market has changed so much that people who might have been able to own a home are now stuck in rental housing and they're not able to uh, purchase with their own income. So they're renting a single family home
Yeah. Yeah.
for their whole lives. And
Yes.
so the investors, these billionaire-backed investors like Blackstone and others, see that this is an investment opportunity. Um, and it's best illustrated by this entrepreneur who buys mobile home parks,
Yeah.
or and who said, I love buying mobile home parks. It's like owning a Waffle House, which is kind of a restaurant chain here in the US. It's like owning a Waffle House where the customers are chained to the booths. They have
Yeah.
nowhere to go. That is the ideal extractive scenario. Emergency room,
Yeah.
veterinary care, mobile home park. Where are you going to go? You're going to have to pay whatever they want. And
Yeah.
and each of us find ourselves more and more in that situation where pieces of our budget are going out to things where I have no control over this
Yeah.
expenditure.
Yeah.
So I'm really trying to say that's a function of this new hyper extractive phase. There's always been that
Mhm.
dynamic, but we're now seeing
Mhm.
more and more of our economic lives bumping into that. I wrote a whole section about pet care, which turns out to be very popular because people love their
People love
animals.
their pets, right?
We love our animals. They're members of our family, and we are spending a huge amounts on their health care and food and dog walking services, whatever.
Yeah.
Turns out the wealth plunderers know that. They've identified this as a great place to buy up and extract more from customers and service providers. So pretty much pick an arena and I can show you how these inequalities are sort of touching that
Yeah.
corner of your life.
Yeah, and thanks. And I love the way that you do connect the dots in each chapter of the book. And then, so it re leads to this whole thing of like, yeah, this kind of structural, this systemic violence, basically, the structural violence that takes place that is unseen, which leads then to this question. This is what we care about here in the Deep Transformation Network. What can be done to transform this? What can be done around this? And let me turn back to you, Joni, because there's
Mhm.
a few great ideas I want to get into, but also you are working with Chuck on a book right now, right, about trying to connect it with this other major crisis in the world right now around climate breakdown, and how could that connection potentially be an opening into trying to transform things around?
Sure. I mean, there's so much that, this sort of form of rentier capitalism has cost billions of people, lots, opportunity, well-being. And there's a sense that, if you want to stop an uprising of sorts over the damages brought on by climate and by inequality, there are some basic fixes that you have to do. Um, there's a lot of complicated levers that can be pulled that are more time consuming. And the work that we're focusing on right now is looking at one of those that might be not exactly a silver bullet, but the closest thing that we might have to a silver bullet, and a temporary one, is to tax extreme wealth, and looking at how that works internationally and in the U.S. We're focusing in this book on the U.S. The book is a U.S. version of a book that was published in Germany last year that I
Mhm.
worked on with Jürgen Randers and Till Kelleroff.
Right.
Um, and um, and the idea is parallel to the now more widely adopted idea that if you taxed extreme wealth, you could achieve about 2% GDP, which is the rule of thumb for what it's going to cost to transition away. Different scenarios include adaptation in that. Some don't. Some
Right.
just include infrastructure. It's unclear everywhere what these costs really are, like whether they're front loaded and what does that mean? Like how many how much of a
Mhm.
toll is it up front to really truly embrace a climate transition? And how do you do that through taxation without creating a dependency on taxation, which um, you know has the unintended consequences of creating a need for billionaires? So,
Yes. Yeah. Right. Right. Exactly. I
so,
hear you. Yeah. Mm.
so we're looking really at what are the taxation strategies that could result in getting the funds we need in the time we need it to get further along on all of these roadmaps that are
Yeah.
in play.
Great.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, no, I love where you're going in that, and that you're also helping us to look at it as more as a global issue rather than just a domestic issue, because of course we all know, and I just noticed that Tanner Millen put in the in the chat here about they can just shift their money to these tax havens and all the rest of it, and
which
there's this
yeah.
there is this great proposal that Gabriel Zucman is putting out at the G20 nations to actually create a tax, and there's been some limited success of an actual globally enforced tax on corporations the last
Right.
5 or 10 years because the G20 nations agreed there should be a minimum taxation. And it hasn't, it's not like it's transformed anything, but it's shown that you can actually get players around the world to work together on this. So this is a great step that there's even a discussion at the G20 level of taxing extreme wealth. But here we are on the Deep Transformation Network, and I kind of want to go deeper on that too. And this, we've talked little bit together about this idea of limitarianism, or whatever it's called. And there was this author, Ingrid Regman, who wrote a book about that, with actually proposing there should be, it's not just a tax on billionaires, we should cap wealth. And there's this great quote attributed to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez some years back, which I just love. But basically, every billionaire is a policy failure. And again, this is not pointing at the person, but the fact of the person that anyone should be allowed to become a billionaire. There's something wrong with our system. And love to either Chuck or Joni, you want to talk a little bit about these ideas because there's also a little bit about how those ideas are so far out, so far from where we are right now. Is it like just utopianism, or is there a way in which the incremental and the transformative can relate to each other? So, love to hear your thoughts about that.
Well, I do think I'll just jump in that I think we have to figure out for the sake of societies and humanity how to cap or limit these concentrations of wealth and power. They just will constantly be driven and moving toward distortion. And how do we sort of begin campaigns today that sort of prefigure that very radical idea? I don't think a campaign to cap wealth in the United States, even at a very high level, is going to be a heavy lift. However, if we say, look, there is a climate emergency and we need to
Yeah.
tax wealth to fund, implement, or even in the immediate term, let's tax private jet fuel, which
Mhm.
is, a form of transportation used by the ultra wealthy, and fund green infrastructure and green transit. Voters in California this year are going to get to vote on an emergency wealth tax to fund healthcare. So those are all kind of precedents. And I think the formula is intervening to address real needs like the affordability crisis that builds a constituency that engages people, funded by taxes on wealth.
Mhm.
And, to be clear, we're not taxing wealth just for revenue. We're taxing extreme wealth to protect the society and protect institutions. But we're not there politically in terms of that understanding and discourse.
Mhm.
So what's great is I think we can have place-based campaigns that start to prefigure this notion of solving problems by taxing wealth. There's other interventions like broadening ownership, expanding worker ownership parts of the economy, rewiring the corporations. But in terms of sort of, and I think this big idea at the global level of a global wealth tax, which helps stretch our imaginations and also sort of helps strengthen that moral discourse around extreme wealth and what should we as societies do about it. I think
Yeah.
that's going to help us move in the right direction. And I actually think the acuteness of the crisis will obviously increase, and
Mhm.
that will create that context where this proposals like this will have a whole other credence and possibility.
Yes, this makes really good sense to me, and oftentimes in my own theory of change, I was talking about how just this kind of unraveling that we're seeing around us is terrifying. It's not something we want to and we welcome, but it's happening whether we like it or not. But it's in that unraveling that the degrees of freedom open up to really begin to ask questions that people had not been asking before.
I
And what I'm picking up, yeah, let me turn to you, Jonah. You wanted to say something, and then I
Oh,
want.
I just, the whole issue of flight, when
Yeah.
taxes are raised in one
Right.
place,
Right.
it just demands really swift action that I frankly don't know whether it's possible to get coordinated action to that. I mean, look at the last COP just to, you know, see what happens when we require consensus. But
Mhm.
um, the, I think that you asked about like what is a wealth cap kind of
Yeah.
look
Right.
like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Mm.
one of the proposals that came out of the models that were done for Earth for All, which were models generated from the original limits to growth, was really, one of the recommendations was that all governments basically increase taxes on the 10% richest in their, you know, in their societies,
Right.
and then until they take less than 40% of the national income.
Right. That was the measure
So
of what was a
exactly.
healthy. Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think that the tax structures that are talked about at the 2% level actually get that far for
Right.
many places. But, for instance, if you look at Germany, the inequality measure is a lot lower than in the United States, where
Right.
it's hugely wide. So if you looked at the impact that a tax might have on someone who is at the lower end of extreme wealth in Germany, it might take quite a bit more bite out of their expendable income than in the US, where it's just,
Yes, yeah.
so, um, those are dealing with things globally, get into, it's trying to apply a rule of thumb globally is sometimes really tough, but creating the concept and then going in and diving deeper and maybe changing some of the percentages around a bit could work.
Yes. Yeah, no, I get you what you're saying. It's almost like and also even if you think about a cap on wealth, in a unequal place like the United States where there's no social safety net, it's reasonable to say, well, actually it's reasonable for people to actually have somewhat more wealth than say in a can't say in Northern Europe, where you actually know that if you get sick, you're not going to end up on the streets because you can't even afford to pay the bills and you get
Sure.
thrown out of your home, whatever. Um, but I do say what I'm picking up from this conversation is there seem to be like two very powerful ways to connect what is going wrong with what could be put around. And one is almost like more like the emergency theme or whatever. We're in a climate emergency, we're in an inequality emergency. And the idea, like you say, here in California, where I am, on the ballot now is this measure about an emergency tax on billionaires. So that's one way of getting it. And I really love this notion of the morality. There's a certain quality about this is fundamentally immoral. That, there's this, the wealth that is in the world today does not belong and should not by rights belong to just a few people, even if they were lucky enough to do a few tweaks to something to suck it all up. That is not the right way because that wealth is the common inheritance of all of us. And well, we can't go into it right now in too much detail, but what I love is the connection of recognizing that and the capping of wealth and maybe tax on land values and stuff like that with a universal basic income or a universal basic dividend available to
Right.
everybody to really shift, which obviously maybe could actually appeal to people once they realize that they've got something at stake around that. But this I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure that we get time for everyone here to get into small groups. So we'll move into breakout groups for 10 minutes or so and then come back to the main room. And thank you already for people who have put great questions in the chat, which we can get to, but I'll invite everyone to also ask their own questions to Joni and Chuck. But as we go into the breakout rooms, Chuck in towards the end of his book, he kind of asks people to focus on this question. I'm going to put this question into the chat right now. And this is what I'm inviting everyone here as we go into breakout groups of like four per person to share a few minutes to ask about how can I personally identify and widen the cracks in that wealth extraction system. We've talked about some of the cracks that are opening up, but it's really going to be on each of us to begin to change that conversation. And so I'd love to hear really for each of us to explore that together. And then we'll come back in 10 minutes or so and we'll open up the space for everybody. So thanks and I'll see you all back in 10 minutes. So yeah, just saying that I was fortunate to have a great conversation. I hope everyone else got to enjoy that too as much as I did. And now is the chance for people to raise your hands. I invite you to click the Zoom raise hand if you'd like to share any ask any questions or share any
Oh,
thoughts on these issues.
Jeremy, we were going to do the announcements.
Exactly. And
Yep.
so I'm inviting people to raise hands. But before we actually go into the Q&A, let me invite Brian to be spotlighted. And just as a context, for a number of months now, in our sociocracy circles, we've been working on trying to create a what we're calling a care team to be there for whatever harms, whatever arise on the DTN. And let me turn to you, Brian, who's going to announce what we've achieved right now on that. So thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy, and hi everyone. So, as Jeremy said, through the sociocracy circles, one of them being called the Hearthkeeping Circle, we developed a care team that met over a couple of months, and we have a proposal which now has led to fruition, and we've created a new entity. So, I believe the link is being put into the chat. Is that correct?
I can put in the chat while you're speaking.
Okay, so good. So there's been a change on the site in that the welcome section is now called the welcome and care section, and there's a care tab, and the link will take you right to what I'm going to read right now. So, an ecology of care is the intentional ground of DTN. Within this field, DTN is bringing into being some village care tents to offer support in various ways. The first of these care tents is now in place, and a team of care circle members who may be reached out to for support relating to hurts or harms that may from time to time occur in DTN. Care tent, hurts and harms. If you experience conflict or hurt, or witness these unfolding within DTN and have been unable to resolve or repair the breach, you may approach one or more of the care team members who have offered their gifts to mediate, listen to, or care for such hurts. What to do? Please make contact with one or more of the members below through the private chat function. And the members listed are Brian Sorfoner, myself, Taya, Sigurd Anderson, Andy Wistreich, and Lisa Ferguson. We will do our best to reply within 24 hours, but sometimes we're not always online. If you don't hear from one of us within 24 hours, please reach out to another member or create a private group chat with multiple care team members if your request is time sensitive. We very much look forward to supporting an ecology of welcome and care throughout DTN and between all members of this relational web, where care tills the ground and spirit we live by, and welcome runs throughout the webs we weave together.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for sharing this with us. And I just want to say, really, this is a part of what really the DTN is about is building a community around deep transformation. And this is something that I feel, it really enables us to feel safe in our community. If there's any harm done, this is now an opening to be able to resolve it in a way that we're all working out, looking out for each other. So thanks for that. And now,
Thanks very much, everyone. I have to go to my
okay,
work
yeah,
job.
thank you,
Bye.
Brian. Now, if we can get Chuck and Joni back into the spotlight, and I see we've got a few hands raised, and there's also some just amazing and important questions and comments that are in the chat too. So I'll try to intersperse those too. But let's turn first to you, Carmen. Great to see you, Carmen. You want to join us? And Joni and Chuck, welcome back.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think this was a session like for 3 hours, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Incredible. So, talking about in the 1980s, AT&T broke up, right? And I was there. I was in the middle of it in New York City as a financial planner and helping people go through the process. And now it's like, what is it? Like 50 years later, what is this? This is absolutely out of control. And now, so we've got the monopolies at the corporate level, but that's not enough. Now we got the monopolies at the personal level, which of course is what we're calling the wealth storage phenomenon. And I just want to ask our guests, what can we do? What can we do as people to come together to move our politics and our government back towards regulation? What can we do? That's one thing. The other thing I just want to ask about conscious capitalism. What do you feel about this whole movement of conscious capitalism? That's all over the place. Everybody's talking about conscious this and I'm conscious that. What does that mean in your work with regard to this extreme wealth. And the third thing, and then I'll pass it on, is the same way that we have a COP30 for environment, for climate change, to to go to the top level, right? Because we got to go from the ground up and from the top down and all around. From the top down level, could we, what do you think about the idea of coming up with something similar, like a COP30 or a COP group, but for income inequality?
Mhm.
And those are my ideas and my thoughts
Great,
right now.
great
Thank
ideas and
you.
questions. Thank you, Carmel. That's a lot. Let me turn to you both. Please go with whatever comes to mind.
Joni.
So I don't know what to take first there. Um, Maybe starting out with your conscious capitalism comment, because um, you know uh, it's sort of the center of change as you know the corporate world sees it. Is it enough? Probably not. And it's very variable. And there's so many moves toward different forms of conscious capitalism. Um, but I think that if people can become far more knowledgeable about what it is that's actually, circular, or what it is that's actually a public benefit, if you're calling yourself a public benefit corporation, and again, instituting some sort of guardrails about the level of impact you can have on the society around you if you're a corporate actor. Um,
Yeah,
that is something that people can start to place demands on. I also think that we're going to have a whole new set of, well, I mean, many people think we're going to have a whole new set of impacts that we have to deal with, particularly in the AI revolution,
yeah,
and focusing on what big levers we might be able to pull there that change a dynamic toward a more kind of citizens wealth fund kind of structure is important. And maybe looking at ownership of our data is a place to start.
yeah, yeah. Great, great. Thank you,
And I
Joni.
would just chime in. I love your idea of sort of giving global extreme inequality kind of a table, a working space, and would love to work with others to think about that. And just on the sort of shifting politics, again, sorry for my U.S. context here, but
Mm.
this conversation about affordability is sort of the buzzword of the moment. You know, I can't afford eggs, I can't afford food, I can't afford housing, I can't, and to sort of use that as kind of that's where people's experiences to say you care about affordability. We need to raise the wage floor, obviously, but we also need to protect the commons. And again, people in the US don't really have a shared concept of commons or commonwealth, but begin to articulate, especially at the local level, our local hospital should not be owned by a private equity fund. We need to wall off. So in terms of like creating a constituency, like you say, a politics for regulation, it's defending what we have, a local food economy, a local owned sector, a local business sector that protect it from the extractors and creating those bright lines and legal lines around those as a sort of way to tap into people's desire, like, okay, something's wrong, politics has been hijacked, but where do we exercise our democracy defending muscles? And one of them, I think, is specifically around place-based ownership
Mm.
and defending the commons.
Yeah. Love that. Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for that. And let's turn to Cara.
Hi, yeah, I was thinking about people that I've met that have said things like, well, you can't really make an impact on the world until you're rich. I'd rather be rich first than right. And I'm
Mm.
thinking about how it just like this materialism penetrates people's value of their self-worth and feel there's no like so the role of having human dignity as developing this concept of that human needs in themselves should have some dignity versus that you only have worth if you're wealthy. And this penetrates really far down. And I see like lower class, middle, everybody, but especially people without wealth, sometimes thinks it seems like that's the way. How do we? So, it's been really painful to see that. Is that does that? How do we work on that? The concept of solidarity, horizontal solidarity, instead of
Mm.
the loyalty on the hierarchy.
Yeah, love that. And let me just add to your point, like even in our language, we get like somebody says, yeah, I'm worth $1 million, whatever, like as if the money you hold actually relates to what your worth is, what your sort of your actual value is. Yeah, Chuck and Joni, what are your thoughts on that? Great point, Cara.
Just on the language, I've stopped using the phrase net worth or
Yeah,
net wealth, like the sort of worth notion.
yeah,
But I think you're right, Kara. You're pointing to this deeper cultural alignment, and it's part of the narrative of like how is wealth created, the stories we tell, the cultural stories, and as opposed to like what is wealth? What is wealth without nature? All wealth comes from Gaia. It's not. There's no this idea of individual wealth. Once you sort of understand the matrix, is illusory. We're not anywhere near that, but as a sort of public framework, but I think continuing to disrupt the narrative of deservedness. If you're wealthy, it's because you did something deserving. And if you're not wealthy or you're struggling, it's because you're lacking some sort of virtue, and disrupting that narrative. And I see telling true stories about where does wealth come from and individual wealth. Uh, I work with this network, Patriotic Millionaires, which is kind of an interesting group. And I think one of its values is going out and they say, yeah, I work hard, but a lot of people work hard. And I took risks, but a lot of people take risks, kind of demystifying where does
yeah,
wealth come from and enabling the culture to see that matrix of commonwealth and nature and other people's work in that web. So seeing that web helps
mm,
us move in that, I think, toward the right direction.
yeah, yeah. That's so right. Because to my mind, the more the things get reframed around the moral issues and the actual what is right, that I think is what we really need. Because there's the whole neoliberal program, like you were talking about, Joni, it started in the 80s, whatever, gives a sense like greed is good sort of thing, like Gordon Gekko's thing. And it's as if people who become billionaires somehow earned it or something. And that is what is so important to shift that discourse. I feel that's what we can all do. Yeah, thanks for that. And let's turn to Abelardo.
Thank you, Jeremy, and everybody else speaking. I come from my experience in Costa Rica and what's going on presently. We're having elections in 2 months, and there's been a lot of dialectics. It's very polarized. And even we have interventions of U.S. senators, right-wing senators who are trying to influence directly our politics and now our elections have become internationalized, and the president he wants to move this into a authoritarian society, and he's putting the blame. He's trying on the judicial system and the electoral system, and he's complaining. They're not for 3 years he's been in power, or 3.5. They haven't allowed me to do anything. Puts the blame on our democratic institutions, and so. My question is, how can we reach the consciousness of people? Now, one thing I'm systematically thinking about is changing people's perceptions. For example, our national health system has been universal and public for about 80 years, in that direction, and it's it's collapsing, really, and so the middle classes are now, they're like 2 years, 3 years wait to get a specialist to examine you in a surgery. So people are dying unnecessarily. But that's a genocide for me, no different from what's going on in Gaza. But people do not perceive it that way.
Yeah,
Now, my approach is the dialectic of universal responsibility. The Earth Charter. That's the moral ethical domain. But then there's differential responsibility, which is differential based on one's access to knowledge, understanding, but also powers like loving kindness and compassion coming from Buddhists in my framework. But I think those are universal values. So how can we work with that kinds of dialectic positively?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Abelardo. And to just to add to that is the fact that the billionaires own the media, right? Almost all the media.
Right.
So how
Yeah.
do we get that messaging out? So,
Yeah.
Duck and Joni, what are your thoughts?
Wow.
Mm.
Well, I mean, getting to a well-being economy isn't going to be easy, and the starting point for nations is really different everywhere. Um, you opened with what's going on in the U.S. politically, and I guess I'd respond to that in part by also drawing from the last question about people's aspirations. And I think it's a moment where people are just preying on fear. And
Mm.
if you get back to the system that created this, we've built that fear into the system. We've created a sense of scarcity when in fact you could work within the international monetary system to solve big problems by creating the money to solve the big problems. Um,
Yeah,
there's not the level of scarcity that, you know, in any way morally justifies the level of inequality and
yeah,
poverty and degradation that we see. So, um, I think that there's a lot of work being done country to country in some places to try to do on the ground work with
mm,
creating a well-being economy. And it really involves, getting down to brass tacks with what you're really trying, like what what are the sort of even numbers that will help you solve for inequality and what might you have to shift in terms of giving people access to better health care or more energy and the last
yeah,
mile energy folks. And there's just so much that could be answered differently in those questions everywhere.
yeah.
But I think at the heart of your question, because you were focusing on morals, is really, are you asking, like, do we even have it in us as a human race? And I choose to believe actually that we do. So I'm hoping.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
yeah, I always turn to the fact that we evolved to be collaborative creatures. It's really only been the last few thousand years with the rise of agrarian civilizations that this greed sort of became such a big deal. And I see so many hands up and just a few minutes left. So what I'm going to do is invite everyone who's got their hands up right now to come into the spotlight and maybe just ask your questions or make your points, but quite briefly. And I will point out Jaya, who I'm going to ask to speak first, but has put some great deep questions in both the feed around this post, around today's session, as well as in the chat. And I invite you, Jaya, to see if you can see if people can respond to your questions asynchronously in the feed, and let's kind of explore them deeper because they're so deep we couldn't even begin. We could take a few hours just to look at them. So, but if we can just get everyone's voice in the room, try to keep it constrained right now because we're running out of time. And then Chuck and Joni, maybe just take in what you have, and we can hear some final words from you. So to you, Jaya, first, if you want to just highlight what is top of your mind of all that.
Yeah, I think the biggest question right now for survival is how can we resolve all military conflicts immediately and as fast as possible, and which role plays the monetary system, the financial system in this competition of the economy, but also of the military competition. And is it possible in this competition to save us as humanity and this planetary life form? And at the same time, is the question, big question, do we still need a monetary system or do we have a new organization instrument in the meantime, which could replace the monetary system in a very short preparation time?
Yeah.
And with this, we could come together and to work together. And I think neither basic income or taxation can resolve this competition simply.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Big issues. And Barbara, if we can just get a quick headline from you as to what you wanted to put in.
Well, yes, I don't agree with Joni that we just need to redistribute wealth. We need to shrink the global economy by 75% and the global population if we're going to actually survive.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that perspective. It's really important to keep that in mind as we're looking at these issues. Thank you. And Mark?
Briefly, Marjorie Kelly was on here a few months ago. She talked about pranks, the importance of pranks and language. And I was thinking about the word. Chuck, I get all your emails for many years. Thanks very much for all your work, and I'm looking forward to reading your books, and Joni as well. But just around the word inequality, like I've done some maths. So seven is greater than six. That's an inequality. But $1 trillion is greater than $20,000. That's also an inequality. The word inequality, I think it might have passed its sell-by date. And the last thing I want to say is the whole question of billionaires. Why the fear around calling out? It's not okay to be a billionaire. That's my strong sense, and I think we need to work on the philosophical and moral and logical reasons why it isn't okay to be a billionaire. So we can, when we say it, we can back it up. Thank you.
Yeah, great points. Thank you, Mark. I love that. Roger.
Thanks. I think that one of the things we really have to think about is there's a lot of great ideas that I've heard today, and I really appreciate them. But I think we have to realize that we have to get the word out. You have to be able to actually get people aware of this. And even more importantly, I think you have to give people a sense of their empowerment so that they can make changes. And for me, one of the ways to do that, actually several ways, is just more direct democracy, community assemblies, really organizing around those things. I had put a link in there a little earlier, and I hope you don't mind, a little promotion here, but what this is the idea of we get together, we figure out ways to create these connections, and I'll just put it in here and really let that do the speaking for me. But again, I think that we have to stop looking too much at the macro and try to figure out how we get our communities to really connect within themselves and together with other communities.
Wonderful.
And that's why I really want to put an emphasis on networks.
Great.
And I do have a Friday evening chat that I do every week where anyone can join. So
thanks, Roger. And welcome to the DTN. And I just want to invite you to bring that linkage in more to our DTN community. These are the kind of links that I'd love to embrace. Thank you. And finally, Benjamin, if we can be quick, and then I want to turn, we're overrunning just a little bit, turn to Joni and Chuck for some final words. So.
Sure, I'll keep it really short. A group of kind of bioregional change makers and I are doing a 4-month tour across the US next year to spotlight community projects in an effort to really just highlight where people can direct meaningful action. And so feel free to reach out. And that's just a big thing on my heart, is directing people into some meaningful work that they can engage with in their communities. So
that's great. Thanks, Benjamin. If you could put a link, if you haven't already done so, in the chat, or maybe another one, so we can all follow up on that. That's great. Thanks. Well, I just want to say this. This has been such a rich conversation. I can just see from the energy that is being shared. Such gratitude to you, Joni and Chuck, and maybe if we could just get some final words from you, and just as an entree into those, one of the things that I was thinking as some people were talking is that when we feel disempowered, it's so useful to remember that if each of us gives up on trying to do something to change the discourse, we're playing right into the hands of the same billionaires who are controlling that discourse. So it's just something to remember. And maybe Joni and Chuck, if you want to leave us just with the last word of what would you want to leave us with that we take from this really rich conversation and live into in our hearts and minds going forward? Joni, you want to start?
Well, I guess, from the comments and the questions in the breakout, I heard a friction between emergency measures and building what we want to live in the future. And I guess that I would just express a sentiment that I hope that we can do both at once. And, obviously, a lot of great care has to be taken to make sure that what you're doing on an emergency basis doesn't create an impossible situation for that new economy or, civilization to grow from. But I really do think we need to have that kind of flexibility. And some of the things that we really truly need to do to build a well-being economy are very slow moving. And there's things like those taxation measures that can pull us out of some pretty severe adaptation and transition needs in the meantime.
Mm, yes, thank you. Such a believer in the yes and theory of change. Thank you for that, Tony. And final words from you, Chuck.
Just this was such a great network and such a great group of people to have these conversations. So I look forward to being part of that, and maybe starting from the end. Benjamin, when you're touring about, come visit us in Vermont, and we'd love to hear the lessons from other bioregional communities. Joni and I both are on the board of the Post Carbon Institute, which does the website resilience.org, and are very interested in sort of the place-based response. And to Roger's point about assemblies and kind of civic infrastructure and the radicalness of hosting people where they live. I come from a state where we have town meetings, and that creates kind of a lot of infrastructure and so I'm very, in my day-to-day life, I'm very interested in these sort of place-based efforts to defend the commons and expand, address inequality. On language, I think you're right. Inequality.org. I remember when we got that domain, we were like, yeah. And now it's like extreme wealth inequality is really the moment we're in. And just on the why do we accept the fact that there are billionaires? I would close with the singer, the 23-year-old singer Billie Eilish, who,
Yeah.
in accepting her award, said, if you're a billionaire, why are you a billionaire?
Mm.
Share the wealth, shorties. That was her famous quote. But I think that there more and more cultural leaders and cultural people are speaking out. I'm actually very optimistic that we're in a deep, hot mess, and we're kind of sort of seeing the arc, the potential for very, very big changes, positive changes,
Yeah.
not just the bad stuff. And I think all the things we're talking about here, civic infrastructure, but also we can't concede that larger national policy discourse and be prepared to offer up tax the wealth, fund climate transition, emergency measures when the moment is ready. So we need to incubate some good ideas so they're the ones that are lying around during the next shock. And people talk about the shock doctrine and Naomi Klein. I like to think we could advance the mutuality doctrine. In times of crisis, we pull together and we create a robust commons that has a very different culture and set of norms. But we need to kind of incubate it as we go.
Love this. And thank you so much. And thank you to you both for the incredible work you're doing on doing just that and getting these ideas out into the mainstream. And also to everybody here. This is not something where we're relying on a few people to do the stuff. It's going to come from all of us. And this is why I just get such a sense of inspiration from our group, from every month when we get to meet together as a community and we know that we can empower each other. And also, just want to give a reminder that we are having a follow-on Circle of Practice meeting on Thursday, which we always do at, I believe it's at 10 a.m. Pacific. And here's a link. You can sign up to that. It's a time to it's a quieter time to explore more deeply together what's been arising in us from this conversation and practice together with deep listening, anchoring, and integrating. So sign up for that if you want to just continue this conversation in a different kind of format. And such gratitude to you, Joni and Chuck. And I definitely want to make sure that we can follow up with you and that we can be here to support and collaborate whatever next steps you're both doing. Big gratitude for today, and thanks
Thank
for
you.
everyone who is part
You
of
as
this great
well.
conversation.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.